For 200,000 years, Neanderthals dominated Ice Age Europe. They were living tanks, stronger, more durable, perfectly adapted to survive where others perished. Then, around 56,800 years ago, something arrived that would change everything. Not another apex predator, not climate catastrophe, but a group of humans who looked almost exactly like us, yet possessed capabilities that made even the mighty Neanderthals retreat. Within 20,000 years, one of Earth's most successful human species had vanished. What kind of people could intimidate beings we consider almost superhuman today? The answer lies in a discovery that rewrites our understanding of human. Imagine stepping into a world where temperatures plunged 40 degrees below what we consider normal winter. Glaciers stretched across continents like frozen oceans. The landscape was an endless expanse of tundra punctuated by isolated pockets of forest, where every calorie burned could mean the difference between survival and death. This wasn't just cold. This was a biological stress test that had been running for hundreds of thousands of years. The megafauna roaming this frozen wasteland were equally brutal. Woolly mammoths weighing 6 tons thundered across the plains. Cave bears stood, 11 feet tall. Saber-toothed cats hunted in packs. Even the herbivores were dangerous. Aurochs bulls could gore a human with their massive horns, and horses ran in herds that could trample anything in their path. For Neanderthals, this environment was home. Their bodies had evolved specifically for these conditions over 300,000 years. They possessed bone density 20% higher than modern humans. Their muscle attachment points were so pronounced that their grip strength would crush a modern hand. They could survive injuries that would kill us outright, heal from fractures that would leave us permanently disabled, and hunt megafauna with nothing but wooden spears and raw physical power. These weren't primitive cavemen, they were biological marvels. Their brains were actually larger than ours, and they created sophisticated tools, controlled fire, and had complex social structures. They buried their dead with ceremony and cared for disabled members of their communities. For 200 millennia, they were the undisputed masters of European survival. But mastery breeds confidence, and confidence can become complacency. The Neanderthals had optimized for their world so completely that they couldn't imagine anything, challenging their dominance. They hunted alone, or in small groups, relying on their individual strength and endurance. They made tools, but always the same proven designs. They controlled territory, but in predictable patterns. Then the newcomers arrived. At first glance, these Cro-Magnon people seemed almost fragile compared to Neanderthal physiology. They were tall, taller than any humans alive today, but their bones were less dense. Their muscles, while impressive, couldn't match Neanderthal raw power. They seemed like they'd be easy prey for the established masters of Ice Age Europe. The Neanderthals had no way of knowing they were looking at something far more dangerous than any apex predator they'd ever encountered. What made these people so formidable that they could not only survive alongside Neanderthals, but eventually become the only human species left standing in Europe? The secret wasn't in their bodies. It was in their minds, and what those minds could create. While Neanderthals had perfected the art of individual survival, Cro-Magnons had unlocked something far more powerful: systematic warfare. Think of it like the difference between a master craftsman and a factory. The craftsman produces beautiful, perfect work, but can only make one piece at a time. The factory might produce less elegant individual pieces, but it can overwhelm through sheer volume and coordination. Neanderthals were the master craftsmen of survival. Cro-Magnons built the first human war machine. The evidence lies in their weapons technology. While Neanderthals relied on thrusting spears, powerful but requiring close contact with dangerous prey, Cro-Magnons developed the world's first comprehensive ranged weapon system. They created spear throwers that could launch projectiles with deadly accuracy at distances up to 60 meters. They crafted specialized javelin points designed for maximum penetration. They even developed primitive bows and a weapon we rarely think about today: the boomerang. But here's where it gets truly sophisticated. Each weapon wasn't just a tool, it was part of an integrated system. Their spear throwers weren't crude sticks, but precisely engineered devices with tailored grips and leverage points that multiplied throwing force by 300%. Their javelin points came in different designs, some for penetrating thick mammoth hide, others for bringing down fast-moving horses, still others optimized for human combat. This wasn't random innovation, it was systematic military engineering. Archaeological evidence shows they maintained weapon-making workshops with standardized production techniques. Raw materials traveled over 200 kilometers along established trade routes, meaning they had supply chains specifically designed to support their weapons technology. The real breakthrough was understanding what this technology enabled. A single Cro-Magnon hunter with a spear thrower could kill at distances where a Neanderthal posed no threat. A coordinated group of Cro-Magnons could bring down megafauna that would require dozens of Neanderthals working together. Most importantly, they could engage in warfare while maintaining tactical superiority through range and coordination. We know the system worked because we found the evidence in Neanderthal bones. Multiple Neanderthal skeletons show projectile injuries, wounds that could only have been caused by weapons thrown from a distance. The angles of penetration and the kinetic energy required point to advanced throwing weapons. Since Neanderthals didn't use these weapons themselves, the perpetrators had to be Cro-Magnons. One case stands out: a 50,000-year-old Neanderthal skeleton with a rib injury that killed him quickly and efficiently. The angle suggests the projectile came from above and behind, exactly the kind of wound you'd expect from a coordinated ambush using superior ranged weapons. The weapons were just the beginning. While Neanderthals lived in small, family-based groups, Cro-Magnons developed something unprecedented in human evolution: mass coordination systems that could operate across vast distances and extended time periods. They didn't just hunt, they engineered ecological warfare. Cro-Magnons figured out how to predict and manipulate the migration patterns of entire megafauna populations. They would set up game drives that funneled massive herds toward cliff faces or bog traps where hundreds of animals could be killed in coordinated mass slaughter events. Archaeological sites show evidence of kills so large they provided enough meat to support communities for months. But here's what's truly unsettling. They scheduled these mass killing events like military campaigns. They tracked seasonal patterns, coordinated multiple groups across hundreds of kilometers, and timed their operations for maximum efficiency. This required communication networks, shared planning systems, and logistical coordination that made their societies function like distributed armies rather than simple hunter-gatherer bands. The Neanderthals never developed anything comparable. They remained individual or small group hunters, taking down prey through raw strength and endurance, but never achieving the kind of systematic environmental manipulation that Cro-Magnons mastered. Even more shocking is what happened during the last glacial maximum, when climate change made survival nearly impossible across much of Europe. While Neanderthal populations crashed and fragmented, Cro-Magnon communities actually maintained their coordination networks. They established trade relationships that moved essential resources across the entire continent. Groups separated by over 1,000 kilometers shared identical tool technologies and raw materials, suggesting communication and coordination, systems that functioned even during the worst climatic crisis in human history. This wasn't just survival, it was strategic adaptation that allowed them to thrive while their competitors died out. But this wasn't the most shocking part. The most terrifying discovery is that Cro-Magnons didn't just compete with Neanderthals, they consumed them, literally. In Gough's Cave in England, archaeologists found human skull caps that had been carefully crafted into drinking bowls. The bones showed systematic butchering marks identical to those found on deer and other prey animals. The victims had been processed like any other food source. Meat stripped away with stone knives, bones cracked open to access marrow, tendons and muscles methodically removed. 2 of the 3 victims were children. This wasn't desperate cannibalism during starvation. It was systematic processing of human beings as a food resource. The level of skill and methodology suggests this was practiced behavior, not an emergency measure. The Cro-Magnons had turned predation of other humans into another form of systematic resource extraction. But here's the detail that changes everything. Similar cut marks appear on Neanderthal. Remains from the same time period. A recovered Neanderthal jawbone shows cutting techniques nearly identical to those used on deer carcasses. The methodology was so consistent that researchers believe this specimen was processed for consumption by Cro-Magnons. These weren't just superior hunters or more sophisticated toolmakers. They were apex predators who viewed other human species as prey animals. The Neanderthals hadn't just encountered competitive neighbors. They'd met organized cannibalistic hunters who possessed superior weapons technology and systematic killing methods. For the first time in 200,000 years, Neanderthals had become prey. This discovery forces us to confront something unsettling about human nature and technological advantage. The Cro-Magnons succeeded not because they were more moral or more civilized, but because they developed more effective systems for organized violence and resource extraction. Sound familiar? Today, we face similar questions about technological advantage and its consequences. Nations with superior military technology dominate those without it. Corporations with better logistics and coordination systems outcompete smaller competitors. Communities with more sophisticated communication networks weather crises more effectively than isolated populations. The pattern established 50,000 years ago continues today. Systematic organization and technological superiority consistently defeat individual strength and traditional adaptation. The Neanderthals were perfectly adapted for their environment, but they couldn't adapt quickly enough when that environment included organized human predators with superior weapons technology. Consider what happens during modern infrastructure. Failures. When power grids collapse or supply chains break down, the communities that survive aren't necessarily the strongest or most individually capable. They're the ones with the best coordination systems, communication networks, and resource sharing capabilities. Hurricane Katrina showed us that individual preparedness means little without community organization and systematic coordination. The same principle applies to climate adaptation today. Nations that successfully manage climate change won't necessarily be those with the most resources or the most individual resilience. They'll be those with the most effective coordination systems for managing resources, sharing information, and implementing large-scale solutions across extended time periods. Modern military theory recognizes this explicitly. The most dangerous adversaries aren't those with the strongest individual soldiers, but those with the most sophisticated command and control systems, the most efficient supply chains, and the most effective coordination between different units and capabilities. We're seeing this play out in current conflicts, where smaller forces with superior coordination and technology consistently defeat larger, more traditional military formations. The Cro-Magnon advantage, systematic organization combined with technological superiority, remains the determining factor in survival and dominance. But there's a darker parallel that demands attention. The Cro-Magnons' willingness to view other humans as resources rather than competitors may have been key to their success. In our interconnected world, we face similar questions about how technological and organizational advantages should be used, and whether superior capabilities create moral obligations toward those with less advanced systems. The extinction of the Neanderthals wasn't just an evolutionary transition. It was the first recorded instance of one human population systematically outcompeting and potentially consuming another through superior organization and technology. That precedent established patterns we're still living with today. This raises questions we can't ignore about technological advantage and human nature. Have you noticed how quickly superior organization and communication can overwhelm individual strength or traditional methods in your own experience? Whether in business, community organizing, or even online discussions, does systematic coordination consistently beat individual excellence? And here's the deeper question. When you possess technological or organizational advantages over others, what responsibilities does that create? The Cro-Magnons use their advantages to dominate and potentially consume their competitors. How should we handle similar advantages in our interconnected world where the consequences of our systematic coordination affect everyone? The story of Cro-Magnon supremacy reveals something profound about human evolution that extends far beyond ancient history. These weren't just successful hunters. They were the first humans to weaponize systematic organization itself, creating coordination networks that could function as distributed war machines across vast distances and extended time periods. But their success raises another question that archaeologists are just beginning to explore. If systematic organization was so effective 50,000 years ago, what other human populations developed similar capabilities that we haven't discovered yet? The evidence suggests there might be other cases of technologically superior human groups that dominated their contemporaries through advanced coordination systems. If this kind of deep archaeological detective work interests you, subscribe, and we'll explore more of these hidden patterns that shaped human evolution.